Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. I'm Alex Perella. I'm here with my lovely co-host Tony Bitsionis. Hello, Tony.
Alex, my boy, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Today, Jay Meier returns. Jay Meier of FaceTec, SVP of North American Operations, and he's involved with the Cantera initiative and with the Identity Theft Resource Center as well. He's everywhere you look, bona fide industry expert, and he came back to talk with us a little bit more about FaceTec's new UR code. Uh, I guess we'd call it a protocol.
Yeah.
And we spoke with him in depth about this recently. But that was really just an overview of the UR code. And this time we got a little bit more into the technical details, like what it means to actually encode all of this information into a QR code, in terms of bits and bytes, things like that. It was pretty illuminating. I was glad to have a chance to ask a lot of follow-up questions, which probably a lot of listeners have as well. And um, it really became clear to me, more so than before, that the UR code could be kind of a big opportunity for a lot of vendors in this space,
hmm
not just FaceTech. And Jay has talked about that before, but going over it again, I mean, it really could foster a lot of adoption of biometric IDV tech where it wasn't being adopted before. So I'm kind of like optimistic for everybody involved in this area. I thought that was really interesting, the way Jay talked about that.
Yeah, I agree. I get more and more interested in it and excited by it every time we get a chance to talk to Jay. I feel like in the, I don't know, 5 or 6 years that I've been covering this industry, this feels like one of the biggest kind of pivot points or changes that I've been writing about and reading about and hearing about. So having him back on has been really helpful to kind of round out my understanding of how QR codes work and what they could potentially mean, as you were just saying, for the industry as a whole and for other vendors, and you know the potential they have to kind of impact the lives of a lot of people. We often talk about how well, at least I always try to relate things to how I would explain them to people around me who don't really know what I do and don't really understand the overall nuances of the industry. And I think UR codes are definitely one of those things that I'll have a much easier time kind of conveying why they're a huge deal.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we've discussed before that having the best solution does not guarantee success, as we saw
Mhm.
with beta versus VHS. But
Yeah.
like it's very interesting to just watch what happens from here. And it's not just us. I mean, you and I were on a call last week with somebody who um, is not working in this particular space, but is in the biometrics industry, and he brought it up.
hmm
Hello, Sam, if you're listening. But he was like, "Yeah, it's interesting what they're doing with that." So,
hmm
I mean, whatever, like wherever it goes, I'm optimistic for everyone who's pushing for this thing, but I'm very interested to see the kind of adoption they get from here.
Yeah, agreed.
But before we get to that discussion, do we have any news that we want to highlight?
I think in keeping with the theme of the episode, big news being that Identity Week announced that FaceTec is the primary sponsor for Identity Week Europe and Identity Week America 2025. I think that's a pretty big deal, and it kind of reinforces just the momentum and the uh, kind of the energy behind UR codes at FaceTec these days.
Yeah. And I'm excited about that event in general. I mean, you and I are planning to go. I saw
hmm
they say they have, I'm just checking now, 25% of floor space. That's all they have left. So people want to go to Europe. I definitely do.
Yeah, June in Europe does not sound bad.
No. It sounds better than November in Toronto, I can tell you that. But
Yeah, let's not get into that.
let's not get into that. So yeah, I don't, there's no other news that I want to highlight either. I feel like there was some kind of huge news event happening last week that drowned out everything else, but it's all
Something.
a blur
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was like a by-election in Toronto City Council that might have swallowed up a lot of people's attention.
Yeah.
That must be
Anyway,
it. Yeah. Should we get to the talk with Jay?
let's get to Jay. Well, let's start with enrollments on the part of the credential issuer. So, like, FaceTec is known for having really like a software solution. So, I assume that there's no special hardware needed. So, like, do they get all the information, all the 3D face data they need for the QR code just with like, what is it, a video of a person's face, or is it even just a photo that they need to take with like a webcam?
Well, we can talk about the UR code system, and we can talk separately about FaceTec's 3D face scans and 3D face maps. Okay, they're sort of tangentially related, but remember that the UR code system is more of a protocol. It's not a product, right?
Mhm.
There's we really except for purely commercial deployments, we're not planning on generating revenue directly from the UR code system. Okay.
Mm.
So how a QR code system works, right? I mean, and there's a thing called an encoder, which, for lack of a better word, I guess, is the software that populates. If you think about a QR code, it's a lot like a chip, right? It's a storage container, is what it is, right? With a standardized interface that allows anybody to scan it with their camera, and then it activates a URL response that you can click on or not, right?
Mhm.
And you can go to any of the app stores and buy um, QR code reader software that doesn't actuate the QR code, but what it does is actually download and allow you to read exactly what data is in there. Okay.
Hmm.
Like bit by bit. All right. And so our UR codes are a standardized QR code, and the encoder software, which is what we call it, is the software that the issuing authority, so a Department of Motor Vehicle, for example, the issuing authority would install that in their platform, okay? And when they actuate the encoding process, it would collect specific data from the data file, which would be, in this case, an identity profile at the DMV. So your driver's license profile. That's, and if you remember the last time we talked about how the identity profile, the driver's license profile, the credential owner profile in the database at the issuing authority is the highest confidence identity data we have in many cases about individual people, right? Besides the State Department's passport deal, which isn't very widely deployed in the United States, the driver's license is the de facto standard for national identity, right? So that's the information that's important. So what the encoder software does is they press go, they click go or whatever it is, and the encoder extracts specific data from the identity profile, manipulates it in a certain way, or maybe a number of ways, and then basically imprints it into the QR code or the UR code, right? And the image that you see with the blocks and, black blocks and white spaces and little weird designs in there, it looks like that's how it's represented, and the software can derive data from that pattern of the image, right? So when is there special capabilities? Well, they have to have the QR code encoder, the UR code encoder. And in our case, and in any other case, for example, we're trying to make this available for anybody to use, right? So our competitors, because we can't, we will fail if we try and do a sole source proprietary software lock-in thing, right? They're onto that. So they don't do that anymore. So our technology, our proprietary technology, extracts the biometric and liveness, or excuse me, the biometric data from the 2D image that's already on file. Okay. And our competitors will have to develop their systems so that their capabilities do the same thing inside of the UR code framework.
Mhm.
You follow?
Yep.
Okay. Because each algorithm is going to derive data differently and, effectively think of it like in a different language from the same source data.
Mm.
Okay. So FaceTec has proprietary technology that we use in our UR code version, and iProve or another Paravision or Ademia or whoever it is that chooses to do this as well, they will have to develop their algorithms so that when a issuing authority goes with UR code but goes with the competing platform, that system will extract the proprietary data from the image that just like ours would. Does that make sense? You following me?
Yeah,
Okay.
so the face, they're just using the face photo they have like basically on file. Like that goes in with all the biographic data. It's all encoded through.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let's just talk about that briefly. Okay. What data does it collect? A lot of people we get the same question. A lot of people say, well, do they have to enroll? Do you have to use a special camera, or do you have to filter them through some special software that FaceTec works with? No, the encoder software, regardless of who the biometric vendor is embedded in the system, the encoder software extracts data directly from the existing data source. Okay. So the identity profile is what I call it. You could call it a driver's license profile or a national ID citizen profile or whoever the issuing authority is. There is a database entry with your information in it.
Mhm.
Okay. That doesn't have to change to use the UR code system. That's the great thing about it, is that the UR code system uses the existing data. Okay. It uses the demographic, biographic data, right? And the administrative data, which could be like a driver's license number, name, address, phone number, whatever data the issuing authority wants to include in the UR code, right? That can vary. They could decide they only want what many would call a CHUID, a card holder unique ID, something or other, right? It's like an account number or a driver's license number. They could just include that, right? And then simultaneously, it extracts biometric vector data from the 2D image that's already on file, right? Because they took your picture when you got your driver's license, right? So we use that. And then it takes that, whatever the selected biographic, demographic, whatever data, plus the biometric data, and the software encodes that into a standardized QR code, which we call a UR code. Okay. So there's no special collection technology except that the biometric vendor will have to develop their systems to gather the biometric data from the 2D image using their language. Make
Right.
sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ademia will have a system that functions just like ours, right? But it uses their technology to extract the biometric information that their system is looking for, right? Like our technology extracts biometric data from the image that our algorithm develops, right? Their system will not read our biometric data. Okay. And so that's a choice that the issuing authority needs to make, or the relying party, that whoever the issuing authority is, whether a bank could do this, anybody could encode a UR code. All they need is a client profile. So a bank account profile, a client, bank account identity profile could be the source. If as long as there's an image in there, it could be the source of the data for the bank's UR code that they want to give you, and they want to put it on your debit card, or they want to put it on your credit card, or they want to use that to make sure you are who you say you are when you try and access the account. You understand? So if a bank chose Ademia, they'd have to use Ademia's biometric capability to extract biometric data from that image, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so the the proprietary nature of the algorithms produces proprietary language in the biometric data that's extracted, which means that the reader software on the other end of the equation that the relying party would use to activate the UR code, that would have to use our technology or Ademia's technology or whoever it is, right? So if I'm in the state of Wisconsin, if you recall, if the state of Wisconsin decided to go with UR codes for their drivers and identity card recipients, people that have an identity profile in the state of Wisconsin database, they could use FaceTec and it would extract whatever demographic, biographic data they want, identity, typical PII kind of data from the profile, name, address, phone number, driver's license number, whatever. It would extract biometric vector data that is collected using the FaceTec algorithms. And so that's unique to FaceTec. And if the state of Wisconsin was using FaceTec, that would mean that any relying party that wanted to be able to use the UR code from the state of Wisconsin would have to have a reader software that uses FaceTec's proprietary technology to read the biometric data that's extracted later from the UR code.
Mhm.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And likewise, any other vendor that might have the
Correct.
technology. Yeah.
Correct. Now, it's possible that a relying party like a bank could potentially have a UR code reader that incorporates, proprietary algorithms and systems from a number of different biometric vendors, right? So they're always ready. If they get a QR code that was issued by the state of Wisconsin and that's a FaceTec deployment, fine, they'll be able to read that. If it's the state of Minnesota and it's an Ademia deployment, fine, they'll be able to read the Ademia extracted data, right? Or Paravision or iProve or whoever in whatever state it is. And so that's kind of the way that's going to go. And again, FaceTec doesn't make money off the encoder at the issuing authority, but if a relying party wanted to use the UR code system in a remote, unsupervised environment like online, it's a pretty good bet that they're going to want to use liveness technology and then the biometric matching, right? So at FaceTec, we sell liveness. So if the relying party was using the UR code reader from FaceTec, presumably they would want to have an agreement where they are paying us for our liveness,
Right.
right? And every time somebody activates the UR code and it does a liveness check online, it would go into a log file, and at the end of the month or the end of the quarter or whatever it is, we would send them a bill that says, hey, you guys used our system 47,000 times over the last 4 weeks, and so you owe us blah, blah, blah amount of money. Make sense?
Yeah.
And other vendors might bill differently. They might monetize that system differently, right? In a different way, but that's between them and whoever. That's just how we do it. Does that
Yeah.
make sense about how the technology kind of works and
Yeah.
who can integrate into it and what that implies about who the relying party needs to work with?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I think this, without making you go over a bunch of the stuff you just explained, we can try and do like a step by step from beginning to end of how this process works.
Let's just back up. Let me try and walk you through the step by step. Would that be a good idea at this point?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So the first thing that has to happen is that the DMV, the issuing authority, needs to decide to use the UR code system. Okay. They have to get it from somebody, right? Let's assume that there's two vendors that are now developed into the UR code system. So there's two biometric vendors that have the capability of working inside the UR code protocol. Okay.
Mhm.
So the DMV says, hey, we got two vendors. We want some competition. We're putting it out to, a bid, and vendor A and vendor B each submit their bid, right? And they say this is what it is. And in fact, it's free for us anyway. We're giving the protocol away. So, and including the biometric capability, right? But let's say the DMV has to choose one or the other, right? Let's say they choose FaceTec. So then they install the FaceTec derived encoder software in their system, okay? And that software then is used to extract data, various types of data from a driver profile that they have in their database. So they can encode a UR code, which is a QR code, with the selected data from that driver software or that driver profile, right? Which includes demographic data, PII kind of data, administrative data, and then biometric data, which is extracted using proprietary algorithms extracted from the 2D image that's already on file there. Okay. So you don't even have to go in order to do this. They already have the information they need to issue a UR code. So to that end, once they get the UR code encoder system in place, they could issue UR codes to everybody that has a profile in the database, right?
Mhm.
They could issue that and print it on the back of a new driver's license, or they could issue that in the form of a PDF and just email it to people, right?
Mhm.
They could send it out on a piece of paper and let people carry it in their wallet. They could put it on a sticker and let people put it on their phone, or on somewhere else, right? But they would distribute that probably en masse. They're going to decide they want to make this available for everybody. Maybe there will be an opt-in thing. I don't know. That's kind of a policy decision, but they could deploy it to everybody that has a data file in that database. They don't need any new information. They just deploy it. However it gets sent out on the back of a driver's license, on a piece of paper, on a sticker, as a new field in a mobile driver's license.
Mhm.
So they could have. That's really easy because that's just a little bit of software coding, and all of a sudden your mobile driver's license includes a QR code, the UR code, that can be used to verify that person is the person represented by the mobile driver's license. So the encoder encodes the QR code with PII data, including biometric data. It digitally signs the QR code, which is critically important. That is new. That's a new novel idea, right? If you remember last time, the digital signature basically guarantees the integrity of the UR code and the data in it. And it
Right.
also tells you who issued it. Okay,
Right.
so the state of Wisconsin would encode the UR code with my data, my biometric data. That's all embedded in this 2D barcode. And then they digitally sign it so that it cannot be altered, or if it is altered, you'll be able to tell because it doesn't have the prerequisite asymmetric key pair,
Mhm.
which is used in a public key cryptography type of a situation. It's the combination of the two keys that validates the data. Okay. If you don't have both keys, it's not legit. Make sense?
Yeah.
That's what the digital signature does. So they send it out. And then everybody in the state of Wisconsin has one of these on their driver's license or has it in their wallet or has it, on a sticker somewhere, right? And then let's say that citizen now has control of their UR code that has the same information in it that's in their driver's license profile already. Only it's in their phone now and it can't be changed, right? They now have the QR code that represents them and it cannot be altered or changed. So they can give that to a bank. Okay. The bank, and I use a bank as an example, it could be any relying party, it could be a dating app, it could be a government, website, it could be whoever, anybody that needs to understand who you are when you're applying for a privilege in their system in their for-profit or commercial enterprise or nonprofit or whatever it is. So you're going to enroll at the bank, right? They want to know who you are before they give you an account. So the bank in Wisconsin says, well, the state of Wisconsin is issuing these UR codes. I'm going to ask this guy if he has a UR code, and if he has one, I'm going to make him give it to me. I'm going to ask him, not make him, but I'm going to ask him to give it to me.
Yeah.
And so I'm applying for a bank account or a mortgage or a loan or whatever it is. They say we need to verify that it's you, Jay. So please send over your UR code. I send it to them. Okay. They have what's called reader software. And what they will do is they will project an image of the UR code somewhere, maybe on their website, in your enrollment process. And I would use my phone or other camera to activate the UR code, right? My UR code. So what that does then is that just like any QR code reader device, it pops up a URL, right? Which you can then touch on your screen and it takes you to a website, in this case, that stood up by the bank. And that website includes the reader software for the UR code. Okay. So when you get there, it's going to say, here's the data from the UR code. It says it's J. Meier. It says that, it was issued by the state of Wisconsin. It says that the digital signature is valid. Okay. We have the public key. So we know that digital signature is real. So we know the QR code is real. Okay. And it gives you the bank, some basic information about that person, whatever the relying party decided to include in that UR code, or excuse me, whatever the issuing authority decided to include in that UR code. So then what happens is you're given the option to confirm your identity with a liveness proven face match. Okay. Right. So when you do that, you say yes. And you go through the user interface, the standard FaceTec user interface, which collects two different images of your face at different distances and collects what's called a 3D face scan, which includes liveness data and matching data. The 3D face scan is then sent to the website that stood up by the relying party, by the bank, and the 3D face scan checks for liveness. Okay. If the reader software checks for liveness by using the 3D face scan, if liveness is confirmed, right, then it deletes the liveness data. And then it leaves what's called a 3D face map, which is biometric matching data. And then that is compared to the biometric vector data that was extracted from the source profile and encoded into the UR code. Understand?
Yeah.
So if that matches, it means that the guy standing there with his phone in his hand or at his computer is actually the same guy that's represented by the data that's permanently and irrefutably encoded in the UR code, which is the same data that is at the issuing authority.
Yeah.
Do you follow?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because you always mention that the liveness data is immediately deleted. So
Yeah.
That seems important. Can you just elaborate on why that's so important?
All right, so we've talked about UR code, the functionality of the UR code system. Okay, and there's some more details there that you might want to understand.
Yeah.
But in this case, let's talk. We're talking about FaceTec's core capability, which is liveness proven biometrics, right?
Mm.
Um, we believe that you need to bind biometric matching data to verified identity data somewhere, right? And last week we talked about how the picture in the DMV profile is the biometric data that binds a human being, me, to the identity data that's in that profile, right?
Mhm.
So in a remote identity situation, you have to check for liveness because you don't know if it's a computer or a real person submitting that biometric data, right?
Mm.
Well, so we move the biometric, what we call a face scan, which is biometric matching data and liveness data collected concurrently at the same time. And it's all mixed together, right? Matching data and liveness data mixed together. It's encrypted and sent to the behind the firewall at the bank.
Mhm.
Then the bank decrypts it, and this is all part of the UR code reader software application. Okay, it decrypts what the device SDK sends it, the liveness and matching data, the 3D face scan. Okay, and it checks for liveness. If liveness is confirmed, the system deletes the liveness data. What that does is it effectively leaves just the matching data, which we call a 3D face map. Okay. The reason we delete the liveness data is because you can't use a 3D face map to resubmit.
Right.
Okay. So if somebody did break into the bank database and they were saving 3D face maps, right? And this person took all the 3D face maps, they couldn't use them for anything because the system is default looking for a 3D face scan, which includes the liveness data and some time stamping and other checksum information, right?
Mhm.
So if they tried to resubmit the 3D face map, to try and rip off the bank or steal someone's identity, the system would reject it because the file is not appropriate. Okay, what they would send in is missing critically and required data, right? So I would say, well, this isn't correct, and it would just say try again, and you can try again till the cows come home, but you're not going to be able to submit a 3D face map when the system is looking for a 3D face scan.
Yeah.
Understand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the bank can choose at that point to bind the 3D face map to the account profile. Okay. The advantage of 3D is that it's orders of magnitude more data to compare and measure, which raises the potential confidence, the potential accuracy of the biometric match. Okay? The more data you measure, the higher potential accuracy you can have in the biometric match. This is why 3D is so much better than 2D, right? It's X times Y times Z instead of X times Y, right? So it's just a lot more data. If they chose to bind the 3D face map to the bank account profile, okay, then they could match so that now let's say that I'm using the UR code to get into my account, right? The bank wants me to use the UR code every time. They are going to re-verify me every time I try and get into the account, or maybe in some step up application, right? Get into my revolving line of credit at the bank, which a lot of people might want to have access to, right? So they want to re-verify that I am actually Jay and the same guy that opened the account in the first place, right? When I opened the account, they took the 3D face map and they bound it to the account profile. So when I activate the UR code again, it collects the 3D face scan, okay, the liveness and matching data wound together, sends it behind the bank firewall where liveness is confirmed, if or is checked. If liveness is confirmed, they delete the liveness data, and then they can compare the new biometric data against either the stored value from the UR code or the 3D face map that they collected from me when they enrolled me in the first place. And they know that the 3D face map came from Jay because the UR code confirmed that it was Jay that was enrolling for the bank account.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Kind of,
in
maybe?
that, like in the situation, like assuming you're doing this at home, you're on your laptop or whatever, do you would you like hold up your phone to show the UR code and it would scan it through
Well,
your
you would have to give it, I mean, you'd have to have an opportunity to scan the UR code with your camera, right?
yeah.
So what we envision is that the consumer deserves control, private control of their UR code. It's their UR code, right?
Mhm.
My UR code describes J Meier with the same, and it's extracted from the data at the DMV in Wisconsin that has this driver and identity profile for J Meier. Okay. We remember that you don't want to have to query the government database every time you want to confirm that this is Jay Meier, because that is potentially a privacy violation. It could give the state an opportunity to figure out that I'm actually opening an account at this bank, right? Which is none of the state's business. So if we take that same valuable information and we put it in a QR code and digitally sign it so it cannot be changed, it's immutable, and we give it to Jay Meier, Jay Meier can then give his UR code to any relying party that he wants to. So the bank might say, hey, the state of Wisconsin issues UR codes. Jay, can we have your UR code? And so we can confirm that you are actually Jay Meier, right?
Right.
So I would send them my UR code. I would upload it to their data file. I could beam it to them in a email, whatever it is. However, that process, it would be an automated process eventually, right? But they would have my UR code, and then it would be presented on the screen like any QR code. And I would use my camera to take a picture of that UR code, and then it would go to the URL described by the UR code. It would take the 3D face scan, right? And they have the identity data and the vector data in the UR code when I gave it to them, right? So they can compare my 3D face map against the stored data in the UR code. If it matches, then we know this is J.
Yeah.
You understand?
And this
Yeah,
is
so
where the actual like technology really makes a big difference, I guess, because if they were using a really bad like not very sophisticated kind of like biometric software, I guess in theory somebody could present like a deep fake video purporting to be Jay, and somehow if they have your QR UR code, they could fool the system in that way. Although I guess you're saying you have to actually send the UR code to the relying party. So
So
it's
the
not,
UR, remember the UR code can't be changed.
yeah,
Okay. The data that's in the UR code cannot be changed once it's encoded. That's valuable. If you
mm,
give that UR code to the bank can check the what's called the public key, which is one of the two keys required to validate that document, right? That image. If both keys are present and they are the appropriate keys, then you know that that UR code is legitimate. It was issued by the state of Wisconsin, and you can have confidence in it because it could not have been changed.
yeah,
Okay. So the data in it describes J.
yeah.
Understand?
I just
So
mean like
then
the
I understand what you're saying.
okay,
If they used a different vendor that had crappy technology, okay, that wasn't using liveness or was using really bad liveness, okay, it potentially could get spoofed. Okay. We sell liveness. And the reason we're successful is because our liveness capability is second to none. Okay. Ours is as good as it gets. That's why we think this is going to help us in the long run because the relying parties are going to choose, presumably, the best liveness vendor they can get, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they could choose somebody else and maybe that one works for them. I don't know. Or maybe it doesn't work for them and they come back and say, hey, we got to use FaceTec, or, there's going to be a competitive bake off. They're going to say, hey, we want to use the vendor that has, the best independent test validation from test labs, right? We want to use a vendor that's ISO, 30107-4 uh, uh, rated, certified, right? That's only one kind of liveness. It doesn't do deep fake injection attacks, but they will have their standard that they want to require their biometric vendor to adhere to, right? Performance and conformance standards. So the bank will choose whoever they want. If they went with the cheap guys could use this too. They could embed their stuff in the UR code system, right? And it would suck because they don't have good liveness, and so they could get spoofed. Or the biometric matcher is so bad that it really doesn't give you a good indication of whether this is the right person or not. Okay.
Mhm.
So we are happy to compete at that level, right?
Mhm.
What this does, if you think about it, what this does is it takes all the other variables out of the equation. Like, is it a fake ID? Right? Is it an AI generated image of a driver's license? Is it, I've talked a million times about how you can go buy fake IDs, right? So I could buy, Alex's identity data and put it on Tony's, a perfect replica of Tony's driver's license, and then use my picture,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that happens. The IDV vendors, they like to tell you that they can figure that out, but they can't prove it. And the early independent tests say that they can't do it very well, right?
Mhm.
Well, what they're really trying to do is figure out, are you the same person that's effectively represented by the data behind at the DMV? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they're trying to do. Hey, we've
Mhm.
done this background check on this guy. He says he's Jay Meier. We think it's Jay Meier. Why is that important? Because we know there's an identity for Jay Meier at the DMV from the state of Wisconsin, because that's what we use here to verify that it's Jay. So if you use the UR code, there isn't any variables there. There's no chance that it's a fake driver's license because we're not using a physical driver's license to upload a picture of, right? It's no chance that it's an adulterated image of a driver's license using AI because we're not requiring anybody to upload anything, right? Except a picture of the UR code, which can't be changed because it's digitally signed, right?
Yeah.
So
So,
FaceTec is like saying we've figured out a protocol that like solves this credential issue. 100% the credential is legitimate. So from there, it's like
yeah, you can
now
think
you
of the
just need,
UR code as a verifiable credential.
yeah,
Okay.
and then, like now you just need to find the best way to confirm that whoever has the credential should have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoever is presenting it is the person that's described by the data in it,
Yeah,
Mhm.
right? So there's some variables in the UR code system. Okay, let's go back to the UR code for a minute rather than liveness versus 3D face scans versus 3D face maps. If you think about a storage container, okay, and you're making soup, okay, and you have water or broth, and you have some vegetables, and you have some rice or potatoes or whatever the hell else you put in there, right? If you put too many potatoes in, you don't have any more room for broth or chicken or whatever the hell you put in there, right? So there's a trade-off. You only have so much storage capacity. That storage capacity in a QR code gets consumed by whatever data you encode into the QR code. Okay. So if you encoded a lot of PII, you may not have enough space left over for any biometric data. Okay. Or if you stored too much biometric data and PII, you wouldn't have enough space left over to digitally sign the UR code.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason this has not happened in the past is because people haven't figured out how to minimize the data enough such that you can have enough space in a standardized UR code without having to sacrifice accuracy, because it's the amount of data that you measure that allows you to raise the potential accuracy of the biometric match. Okay. So this is the first time there's other QR codes out there that have some type of biometric data in them. Okay. And they might have some PII in them, but they're not digitally signed by an issuing authority because maybe they don't have enough space left over for a real digital signature, right?
Mhm.
Or they included an, sort of a low resolution image of the person's face in the QR code. Well, those images take a lot of they take a lot of space, as you know, right? So what that ultimately does is give you the relying party an opportunity to look at the low resolution image and compare it to the living face that's staring at them, and they can say, oh yeah, this looks like the same guy. you know it's really not good enough for biometric matching at any reasonable level of accuracy. Okay, because it's so much data. Or they have to make a QR code that's really big, right? It's huge. The actual surface of the QR code is 2 inches by 2 inches, and that you need that much, two-dimensional space to incorporate enough data in it to accommodate all of the important functions that the UR code provides: the biometric data, the PII data, and the digital signature data. Okay.
Yeah.
We've been able to minimize the data enough, and it took us 2 years to figure out how to do this so that we can put sufficient amounts of PII in the UR code, along with sufficient amounts of biometric data in the UR code to manage a 1 in 2 million false accept rate. Okay. At a 1% false reject rate, we have enough data in the UR code to provide a 1 in 2 million false accept rate. The standard, for example, the standard benchmark at NIST in the new draft of 800-63 says at a 1% false reject rate, they want to have a false accept rate of 1 in 10,000. Okay.
Mm.
Is that good enough is that accurate enough in some applications? Maybe. Is it accurate enough in other applications? No. Okay. So we have enough data to accurately represent the identity and have enough biometric data that we can get a extraordinarily high match confidence in the biometric match. Okay. And
Mhm.
still have room left over to digitally sign it so it can't be changed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Make
Uh,
sense?
yeah. And I remember you last time we had you on the show, you said you were talking about the data on the UR code, and you said you guys even figured out a way to put two faces on one.
Right.
Is that because of just the advancements you guys have made in figuring out how to minimize the data, how to compress it down, and then also how does how's the performance, like you talked about how the accuracy is improved by more data, is the performance impacted at all? Is that the reason you want to compress
Well,
it down, is because you want it to be
yeah.
as physically small as possible, or
The
because
answer is yes. Okay. Our UR code is a standardized QR code, and I think it's series 10. Okay. Which means I think it's like 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters, not 2 inches by 2 inches, right?
Mhm.
It's small enough that we can put it on a driver's license and still have all of that required information in it. Okay.
Right.
So what you're talking about, Tony, is we figured out how to put enough biometric data in there to accommodate two faces. Well, as I mentioned, there's a trade-off. Okay, we may have to require less PII data.
Mhm.
Okay. So in the example I gave last time, I was talking about like Activision or something like that, or PlayStation, right? They don't really need to have a lot of PII in the UR code that they might use for their, to authorize the in-app purchases of new flamethrowers, if you remember,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
new magic swords or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
They only need an account number, for example. Microsoft or whoever it is says, well, we just need the account number because we already know who these people are, right? So we just need the account number. And that leaves more space available for biometric data.
Mhm.
Okay. So
Yeah.
because there's more space available, we can split it into two different we can take
Right.
face vector from two different faces and
Yeah.
still have enough space to digitally sign it. So there's a trade-off. Less PII means potentially more biometric data, which if it's one face means a lot more data to measure, which means a lot higher potential accuracy, right?
Mhm.
Or if you split it into two faces, maybe it's not as accurate. Each one individually is not as accurate, but it might be accurate enough. But you gain value there because you have mom and junior both represented, and that means they both have to be in front of the system
Mhm.
before the kid can go buy the new magic sword.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You understand? So there's this
Yeah.
trade-off. Other vendors, other biometric vendors and liveness vendors and whoever, they're going to have to figure out how to minimize their data. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're going to do it however they do it. They will do it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm absolutely confident that they'll be able to do it. And I don't know if it's going to take 2 years or what. We're not going to help them do that, right?
Right.
But they'll be able to do it. And we're trying to make this open source so that they can. And the reason that we want more vendors to be able to do this is because there has to be competition for the states and issuing authorities to be able to use this at all because they
Yeah.
won't lock in on FaceTec only.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mhm.
Understand?
Yeah. I
So
remember you putting
do
it,
it.
it in DC when you gave a talk. You said, why are we doing this? Well, we're creating a big pie, a
Yeah.
big
Yeah,
valuable pie, and a few slices of a big valuable pie is still a really, really lucrative slice, essentially.
that's the
Um,
idea. I
yeah.
mean, if you think about it
Yeah.
this way, we've talked about this before. The IDV industry, as it is today, should have existed for 30 years.
Mhm.
Okay. When you're enrolling people online for whatever, your game box or, your bank account or whatever it is, right? You want
Mhm.
to know who's enrolling. If you look at the pandemic fraud stats, they're almost, again, 85% of the frauds and the cyber attacks out there involve the transfer of a valid credential to an unauthorized user.
Yeah.
That's because we don't know who is using the credential, which means we have never really figured out how to confirm that this is the right guy, right?
Yeah.
That's the nature of fraud today. And despite that the cryptography guys still harass me about this, that is a fact. Cryptography cannot solve for that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what this does, if you think about all the IDV vendors out there, they have emerged out of the pandemic, and there's 1,000 of them, and some of them do an okay job, some of them do a really bad job, none of them do a really good job. Okay. According to the new Magic Quadrant that came out from Gartner and their new analysis of what makes an IDV vendor good, my interpretation is that none of them got straight A's. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is fine. And we've already talked about that. That's not uncommon. Well, what this does is it takes all of the variables out of the IDV thing out of the equation. And that means that we can have more and more confidence in remote identity verification once the UR code systems are out there being used, right? It's extraordinarily high confidence data. It's potentially an extraordinary high confidence match, which means we know liveness proven match, which means we know who this person is, even though they're not sitting across the desk from us. Okay. And that means more remote identity verifications, more remote identity authentications using the same biometric capability. Okay. And that means more liveness. They're going to need liveness proven more often, right?
Yeah.
We get paid for liveness. So if all these vendors, all the liveness and biometric vendors are using UR codes for all the reasons that just make sense to use it, okay? And all the issuing authorities are using UR codes because of all the reasons it makes sense to use it, it should cause the demand for remote identity liveness transactions to absolutely explode.
Yeah.
And, if the total market is 300 million today, or who knows, what it is, I can tell you it's nowhere near its total addressable market, but we're waiting for things to happen. And you guys hear my dog barking? Sorry, my dog is barking, so I'm paranoid. If that happens, the demand for liveness should explode, which means the rising tide raises all boats. Okay. Yeah. All the vendors benefit. If we keep our market share, we're going to keep like half of the market. That's probably not a reasonable expectation, but even if there's 5 or 10 of us and it becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry, that means you have 5 or 10 really successful vendors. Make sense?
Yeah.
And for listeners, Jay was just frowning at his dog who continues to bark, but it's not bothering him.
I'm not
If
even.
I sound more scattered than usual this time, it's because I'm trying to manage my puppy.